Benvenuti amici and welcome to Life is Grape in Tuscany, where we uncork the rich traditions, delicious wines, and timeless dishes of this beautiful Italian region. I'm Rebecca Christofferson-Gutenoir, your wine-centric guide through the vineyards, olive groves, cheese caves, and so much more. So whether you are living in Tuscany, coming to visit, or just have Tuscany in your heart, this podcast is aimed at you. Welcome back to Life is Grape in Tuscany, where every bottle tells a story. Today we're heading to southern Tuscany, to a hilltop town that's home to one of the most sought-after wines in the world, Brunello di Montalcino. But this isn't just a story about wine. It's about love, sustainability, and what happens when passion for nature and tradition turns a tiny farm into a world-recognized organic winery. Our guest today is Katia from San Polino, a biodynamic winery she founded with her husband Gigi. Their first Brunello release back in 2001 marked the start of something extraordinary, and I was lucky enough to witness it from the very beginning. Today, we'll dive into their journey, the challenges of organic and biodynamic winemaking, and what makes Montalcino such a magical place for wine lovers and dreamers alike. Welcome, Katia, to the show.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hi.
Hello.
We're sitting here at San Polino, and it's such a peaceful place. Could you tell us how you ended up, as a British person, living in such a marvelous place, in paradise?
Well, I got here almost by accident. So I had met Gigi, otherwise known as Luigi. I mean, his real name is Luigi. I'd met, but we know him as Gigi, or Luigis had become Gigis in Italian. And I had met him when I was traveling, when I was 18. And I went back to, after, having met him, I went back to finish my studies and university in the UK. And then at the end of which, I didn't really feel like staying in London. I felt a bit of a fish out of water there. It was never really my place. It is my home, but I just didn't want to be an adult working there. So I came out to Italy to see what was happening. And he was in Italy, and I ended up by staying. And in the late 1990s, in the early 1990s, late 1980s, we decided to buy the farmstead of San Polino, which had been abandoned for about 50 years, owing to the historical things that we can get onto later if we want to. And we came to live here, and then the story of the wine took off by itself. And we're all involved in it now, the whole family. And so it's rather fun.
How did it look like back then? I mean, probably not so different from now, but you didn't have the vineyards around. Did you have olive trees? Because the olive trees here are very old, right?
Look, the houses, I think that if you come to this landscape even now and you just sort of shut your eyes and open them again, it probably hasn't changed that much since about the 1500s because of regulations, forestry regulations. You're not allowed just to make fields as you want, or planning permission. You're not just allowed to build things onto houses. So pretty much it would have looked like it did in the 1500s, the 1300s. I mean, obviously there were additions to the house, which I can't ascertain exactly what they were. I mean, we can see what the original center point of the house was, but like where I have our office at the moment, when you look at the wonky floors and the roof there, you get a feeling that it didn't maybe change that much for the last few hundred years. So there was no water and there was no electricity, and we did use a machete to get up to the front door, and there were no vines. But somehow those are details which you change in the course of 5 years, 10 years, and we're talking like 500 years here, 700 years. So really pretty much it will have been the same. I often, just to say something about this, I often think that like the muscle memories that I've developed in this house of getting up from the sitting room and walking down the stairs and going up to pick up a log to put them on the fire, it's probably the same muscle memory that a woman 500 years ago would have had, because no doubt she would have stored the wood in more or less the same place because it's the sensible place to store it. So, yeah.
So
that's fun.
When you were living here in the beginning, was it your intention to become a producer of Brunello at the time? This was, so we're talking 1980s, 1990s. So it was still when Brunello was working up its reputation. What happened in the 90s that made you think, oh, maybe we should have a go at this?
Well, it certainly wasn't my intention, because I was London born and it didn't come into my head. I didn't have that agricultural sensitivity, let's say. It was Gigi's idea, but it was also stimulated by the fact that in that period, Brunello was getting well known and there was more demand for it than there was supply. So the bigger wineries, there'd been an investment by some very large and important wineries, including the Banfi at the time. And they were asking for extra hectares to enlarge their hectares, the amount of wines that they could produce. And it was obviously seen to be good for the area, for the territory of Montalcino, because it would bring, it was a disadvantaged area at that point. Economically, it had fallen into decline over the centuries. And so there was an agreement made between the larger wineries and the smaller wineries, or smaller people, with small amounts of small producers, as they're called. And so the larger wineries were given extra hectares to be allowed to plant, rights to plant, and the smaller farmers were given lesser amounts of hectares to plant. But I must say in this that actually it was a pretty well thought out idea, because amongst the smaller producers, if you could prove that you'd already had vines on your property, and if you had children who were under 40, you could hand over your farm to the children. They could get extra rights for planting. I think they were giving out 7 hectares per person at that point. But the person involved, the younger person who was under the age of 40, had to sign a paper committing themselves to stay 10 years in the area to see the planting through into Brunello. So what that meant is a lot of these people then made families, and they kept the schools going, they kept the local economy going in all sorts of ways, the local supermarket, the shops, the hospitals, whatever it was. And it became a living environment. And so we got into the tail end of that, because we hadn't had vineyards here, but there had been olives here, and Gigi had, with very good foresight, he had already certified the farm as organic. It was the first certified farm in Montalcino. We weren't doing vineyards at that point, but he, with that certification, with the intention to plant, he could ask for hectares, and we got given 1 hectare of Brunello, the rights to plant, and 1.5 hectares of Rosso di Montalcino. And we weren't sure what to do with it. And I said to him, well, you do as you like. And he decided that he wanted to go ahead and do it. So that's how the story began. And now we've got 10 hectares.
Wow.
That's, borrowed. Yeah. What do they say? A bit borrowed, a bit lent, a bit. I don't say stolen. We didn't steal it. No.
So let's talk a little bit about the whole philosophy that you basically used in the beginning that you felt was right for your farm, the organic growing, being one of the first. It must have been a little bit daunting because there wasn't a lot of experience to be shared by farmers. And I remember in the first years, you were talking about maybe a handful of producers who had gone organic. We're talking now 2006, 2008, when we started to talk. And now there's a whole movement, I would say, or a lot of people that have gone in that direction. It is huge, isn't it?
It's fantastic. I mean, I've got so much to say on that, but I'll limit myself to the question, because I tell you, I just was recently in New Zealand. I went to an organic wines conference, and I was invited, and I was given 2 titles, and one of them talks about it was called Rooted in Change, Cultivating an Organic Legacy in Viticulture. And that was really, really, really interesting. So I got into the whole thing about Montalcino, what had happened to Montalcino and how it changed. So when we began in the early days, there was really nobody organic, and it was very people were very what could you say? They believed that it would never be possible. And now over 50% of wineries in Montalcino are organic. I'm not talking vineyarded areas that, like, there's a whole, that there's, let's say, lots and lots of vineyards in Montalcino, but there's a lot of small wineries, and over 50% of those wineries are organic. And Montalcino itself as a territory is taking the sustainable label of Equalitas to make itself into a sustainable territory. So there's been a whole revolution of a territory reinventing itself in the form of the zeitgeist, I would say, and very cleverly and rightly too. And so our philosophy has morphed over the years. I mean, it was always, the idea was to work with nature to find solutions to issues that come up in the vines, to produce wine, in order to produce a wine that's very reflective of its terroir. But obviously, that's 30 years ago. And it was based very much on Gigi's experiences in the past and his work. He'd been working in Amazon with mapping biodiversity. So he'd understood that biodiversity works in synergy and also with human beings. It's like the Amazon wasn't a wilderness. It was inhabited by people. And so it had been created. The forest had been created somehow together with human beings. And so really, we knew that we sensed that it could be possible. Our views have morphed a lot over the years. At least I'm talking about myself, because I would ask now, I started to ask kind of questions like, what is nature? What is our relationship to it? What is the wilderness? What is, who has agency? So there's this actually wonderful philosopher. Her name's Donna Haraway. She's an American philosopher. I think she works out of Santa Cruz. And when she's looking at any environment, ecological environment, she uses the metaphor of the cat's cradle. We've all done cat's cradle with bits of string, and you 2 sets of hands, and you play with it and you make different forms. Well, she enlarges this, and she says that the hands don't have to be human. At times there's other hands, but the human hand can also be there. So in talking about vineyards, I very much like to see it as what could be called making a living vineyard. There's another organization called the Porter Protocol, and they're working with international wineries for solutions to climate change. And one of their projects is called the Living Vineyard. And so I take this notion of the living vineyard. What is the living vineyard? Well, first of all, you see it as this cat's cradle with all the different creatures that live in and around the vineyard and dependent on the vineyard, including the vines, and try to make it into a unified whole where it can sustain itself and all the creatures who eat and reproduce and survive because of it. And so that's very much where I am in terms of a philosophy. And then you have to look at that. I'm talking about myself, because within our family context, everybody's got their own, let's say, thing in their head about what they'd like to do. But I think we're pretty much actually on the same, so I can move into the plural. One of the projects that we've been involved in now is the one of, let's say, vitiforestry. So planting trees within the vineyard. And we started in 2018 by planting fruit trees around the circumference of a small vineyard. And we were planting fruit trees, even though we're surrounded by oak forests, because the oak trees are not on the same fungal webs as are the vines. So we planted fruit trees that are on the same fungal web as the vines. So with the notion of making, sort of enhancing the biodiversity under the soil, because we have to realize that under the soil, there's more than 50% of the world's biodiversity lives under the soil and in the soil. And as we, and agriculture has a history of destroying the soil. And if the soil is gone, well, then we won't survive any longer. So we actually, the onus is on people who are doing work with the soil, agriculture, to find ways of finding a compatibility, our needs and the needs of the soil to continue working. So that's very important. So I've mentioned the fruit trees there. In another field, we've planted maple trees within the rows themselves. And we've chosen maples just because they're native, indigenous to the area, and they're fast growing, and they don't drop fruit. So we don't want fruit dropping in August in the vineyard, because it will rot and bring in fruit flies. So, so we're working there in, trying to just enhance every way that we can the biodiversity in the vineyard. One of the things is to reduce our tillage. I heard a wonderful word in New Zealand. It's called intentional tilling. But then actually I do understand it, because it's standing back to look at, do I need to till? Do we need to? So many of our vineyards, we've been lucky this year at least, it's quite a coolish year. It's had a hot moment, but it's not overly hot. We've been able to keep a carpet of grass in many of the vineyards. And that's another thing, because you've got to realize that the more species of grasses or plants you have in the field, the more complexity you will have below ground, because all the plants and grasses photosynthesize and bring their sugars down and feed bacteria under the soil and funguses under the soil. And the more complexity of greenery you have above the soil, then empirically the more diversity you'll have of bacteria, etc., under the soil. And it does mean that if you have one species that dies out, you'll have another species that can take its place. And that's pretty much the philosophy behind how a forest manages to survive, through biodiversity, while, obviously one species is in competition with another, etc., etc. But the more biodiversity you have, the more chance you have for survival as a whole.
Right. I love the care that you put into the viticultural part of the farm. A lot of times I think when you go to wineries, there's not as much thought process that goes into the actual growing of the grapes. It's more about the chemistry that happens inside the winery, what kind of barrel and so forth. So I love this part of San Polino. I love to come here and hear you say these things also during our tours. But I do want to get into the wine a little bit. So Brunello obviously being this super famous wine region in Italy and well known across the world. How do you feel it's evolved in the past 20 years when you've been producing, well, 25 years that you've been producing wine. How do you feel the wine has sort of found its point of success? I don't know if that makes any sense to you as a question.
It makes totally sense. And you've got to realize as well that when I started, I didn't know so much about wine. So my impressions were what I know about today is very different than how I saw the world of wine when I started, because I've evolved as well. What I can say is that people in the Brunello territory, the territory of Montalcino, are extraordinarily professional, and there's a lot of extraordinarily good work going on, and people expect the best from themselves and their wines. So I do believe, from what I understand, the quality of, from what I understand, I mean, you know, I taste the wines, the quality of wine has risen, I think, exponentially. Defects are not allowed. Eccentricities are allowed, but not defects. Eccentricities can be enjoyed. Montalcino is a very interesting area because actually you've got one grape and one wine and about 210 different wineries who are all making different expressions of that wine. And I'm constantly amazed when we go to wine events which are attended by all the people from Montalcino, what extraordinary wines they're making. And I think that it's very interesting that from the point of view even of the consortium, that they're taking on this, you know, the idea of making Montalcino sustainable territory, because it's actually looking at what Montalcino has and realizing that it didn't come by chance. It's not that we can call Montalcino sustainable by chance. There's 50% of Montalcino is forest. There's 24,000 hectares in the historical territory, and 50% of that is forest. And I remember saying once to one of my neighbors, I was saying, yeah, but that's luck, isn't it, that we came into this, so that we've got this space where 50% of it is forested. And he said, no, it's not luck, it was decision. And that made me stop and think. And I don't agree with him about a whole load of other things, but he's very clever, and he got me to stop and think about it. And I thought, actually, it's true. It's centuries of people's work. And in a sense, that is reflected in the wines, because people are phenomenally proud of their own little patch of vineyard, which makes their own little patch of Brunello. And every single different area has a different exposition, different geological components, different philosophy in the winemaking, but each one is perfect in itself. And so I'd say that the people now, everybody speaks English, everybody travels, everybody's university educated, everybody's specialized, and everybody has something really, really interesting to say. And because of the political decision to give the vineyards to the under 40s in 1995, you've got a lot of young people, you know, their children growing up in the wineries who are being passed the baton, and they're in a new world, you know. So I find it great.
And that's including your own children.
Absolutely. I've got 2 of them, 3 of them now, who are all, and I keep looking around thinking, are you sure? But they're adults. They make their own decisions, and I'm really happy about that. If they like to be a part of it, it means that somewhere they think that it's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So going from 1,000 bottles when you first came out with your first ever vintage in 2006 with the 2001 Brunello, to how many bottles do you produce now?
About 30,000.
30,000. Still not a huge amount, but considering that it's a wine that you have to age for 5 years before you can actually release it on the market, means that you always have at least 4 vintages hanging around the winery, which requires space, investment, your own time, the time of your workers. It's a lot. How do you feel that scaling went, and is it something that you would do again, or would you perhaps say, no, I would do half of that in hindsight? How has that journey been for you?
That's a really, really, really interesting question. I am pleased that we're doing the amount of wines that we're doing.
Because you're still considered a small winery, right?
We're still a small winery. But, you know, we can at any time decide to scale back. Scaling up gave the possibility for people to work here. And essentially, we're about 7 people working here. We're, if you consider some people are doing half-time jobs and everything, but it's myself, and my husband is still very much involved. He's not part of the physical work so much, but he's an absolute backdrop for questions and advice and everything like that. And then the 2 boys, my 2 sons, work here. One has been away for a year or 2, but he wishes to come back now. My stepdaughter, she's been now helping us with the social media, and we work together with another family. They've got us, we've got them. We work together with another family. There's 3 brothers who were originally from Albania. We've been working, but they're now Italian, naturalized Italians with their own families here. And they work with us as well. And if you scale up, by scaling up, it meant that anybody who's got a good idea somehow has the place to work and do the work and be able to bring in results. Whereas if we just stayed as we were, we'd have been 2 old people, me and Gigi, bumbling around the place with not that many people around us. So somehow it's become a vibrant community. And the joy in all of this is that people can come and go. Like my younger son, Giulio, went away for a year to do something else. And when he comes back, there'll be space. He'll just have to think of a good way to get involved, and he can bring something back. Like Shani, my stepdaughter, she's been helping us with the social media. Could we have done without it? Yeah, but great that it's there, because it's better, and then maybe it sells more bottles. So, the scaling up from that point of view was a very good idea. On the other hand, we have a lot more bottles to sell. So 20,000 bottles, more or less, we can handle that. It's a bit of, where do we put that, but we can do it. We can do it. The extra 10,000 bottles does pose a challenge. Yet there are 3 young people in the winery, and that will be their job. That will be their job. And I think that if we manage to keep the authenticity, and we manage to keep on with the activities that we're doing in the vineyard, because honestly, I do feel that it sounds crazy, but it's a sort of political activity here. We're living in a dysfunctional world at the moment, and from there are wars here. I'm not going to have elephants in any closet here, because I feel very strongly about these terrible things which are happening in the world, and it makes your heart break, and you can't be out there on the street. We live on the Tuscan hillside. They're not mega demonstrations. There's not. What can we do? What can we do? Well, our part is that when the people who are doing that have done it and they have to find a solution there. That's their job. Our job is to try to keep the planet intact, to find out whether we can do agriculture without damaging the soil. There is tons of research coming out of universities, all sorts of research institutes. Soil studies have just galloped ahead in the last 15 years. Our job is to, even when they have not yet been applied in a practical level, even when we're not getting publicity for it, or we've not got a PhD student here working on it, it's to be up to date on this stuff, join the dots as we see them and apply them, apply that stuff in our soils, and then publish papers about it ourselves, write about it, talk about it, get people involved. And then if we can be just really a drop in actually what is coming quite a mega movement for climate activity in agriculture, through the regenerative movement, through the sort of conference that I was just at in New Zealand, then we'll have done our part. That's all that we can do. Everybody has to do what they can do.
I love that, Katia. It means that we also have to do our part as consumers and enjoy and drink wines that talk about territory like yours do. So thank you so much for joining me, Katia.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It's been really interesting, and I've really enjoyed catching up with you.
Me too. So talking to Katia reminded me of why I fell in love with Brunello and with the people who make it. San Polino is proof that great wine is more than just grapes and barrels. It's about care for the land, respect for tradition, and a little bit of rebellion to do things your own way. So if you're ever in Montalcino, take a little detour to San Polino. Trust me, it's worth it. And until next time, remember, life is short, but life is grape.